Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by Katie and Andrea. Now, I've never had two people come along for a recovery story before, so I'm really excited to hear this one. As I said, this is a recovery story. This is Katie's story, and we're going to hear what worked, what didn't work, and what recovery looks like. So, guys, thank you so much for being here. It is lovely to meet you, and I'm excited to hear the story.
Great. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Katie Brennan, and I was impacted by long COVID in the really early days. So I got it in March 2020 in one of the first waves to hit the UK, as I was based in London at the time. And yeah, really delighted to be here. And thank you for everything that you've done for the community. And I think we're really excited to kind of share my story and also to pull Andrea in and talk a little bit about how, I guess, some tools and tips from the high performance world can help.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Andrea Henkel, Burke, and I competed for Germany at the Olympic level for the Olympic team for Olympics in biathlon. It's cross country skiing and shooting, and so I'm every time a fan of how can I keep my body functioning and also on a high level, not just while I was competing, but also after I stopped competing and became a personal trainer and learned much more about my body and how I could have performed even better. And it was really interesting, but now it's also good to support others to basically support a recovery and their body systems. And I'm basically part of Katie's recovery story.
Yeah, which is great, and I'm very grateful for it. So before I got sick, I was living in the UK. I'm American by background, but I've been in the UK for a number of years. I was there for almost 20 years in the end before I moved back to the States the last few years, and was an economist by background, working in the National Health Service, doing a population health management work and supporting care improvement, which was amazing. And I was so fortunate to be able to work with really talented clinicians and also have access to a lot of great data on people's health conditions and looking at complex conditions, which I think is relevant to kind of this story because there were a lot of conversations about people with complex conditions, complex needs, who maybe, weren't being, fully served or getting fully better through the normal kind of care pathways, or, they get diagnosed or they maybe wouldn't get fully diagnosed, but they had issues that were kind of multi-system issues like, pain, heart rate variability, diagnosed with low-level mental health issues or depression, anxiety, things that now we, people in the long COVID community can really identify with. And, I think I was fortunate to have a little bit of exposure to different treatments and support options that maybe, were not as mainstream for those groups. But I know that knowledge of that space was something that I ended up coming back to when I found myself on the other side of those statistics. generally speaking, I just had a little one and was, kind of living a busy, I guess, suburban lifestyle, commuting into central London every day, and young family, and, pretty high stress job I loved, but it was an intense life, always on the go. And, looking back, I'm probably, in a pretty heightened state throughout. There wasn't a lot of downtime, and I wasn't always the best at, carving out those spaces, even though I was exercising and I thought I was eating well and all of the things that you try to do. But I think, on the other side of the recovery, realized that those, I probably wasn't getting a lot of that right, and that my body was at risk. I think I'd also had a C-section, and was, kind of recovering from all of the kind of major abdominal surgery, and
that's not
and
nothing. That's quite major.
Exactly. And then, all the kind of, hormonal shifts that happen after pregnancy, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think that to say that there's just a lot going on personally, professionally, and with my body is probably a good scene setter.
I can relate on some level to what you're saying, because I got ill at a very similar time to you. I was also March 2020 in the UK. And also, let's say there was a lot going on. And, for me, I took this kind of like, oh, for goodness sake, you asked for this. My first response to anything is to blame myself. Self-compassion is still something I'm working on. And that blame is not true. And it's also not helpful. And there's this amazing quote, I think it might be Maya Angelou, the one that goes something like, I did the best that I could with what I had. Now I know better, I do better. And I think that is one of the, let's say, gifts or silver linings maybe of an experience like this, is that we learn these lessons in the worst possible way. But what happens when we come out the other side is that we do know better, and we do better. And we are healthier and more resilient as a result. But my goodness, it's a pretty bloody awful experience to go through to get those lessons, isn't it?
Completely. I think that sums it up, that, you look back, you think, my goodness, how did I not realize
Yeah.
that in the past? But I think, like you say, it's not always part of the conversations that people have about how to look after yourself. And, I think that's where, talking about it is really helpful. And, if you can help other people get a nugget that changes their perspective, then that's a wonderful thing. But yeah, it's so strange. And, I had a fairly mild case of COVID. I got pretty sick for about a week, but, it was, and had some breathing difficulty, but I was home. And, I'm sure I picked it up on the trains and in the office, during that time when everybody was starting to get sick. And, I was really fortunate that no one in my house got sick, because I isolated very early. So I got to watch my daughter taking her first steps out the back window in our garden, which, was lovely and a little sad all at the same time. But it was great to be able to do that. But I think that, I figured after a few days that I would start to feel better, and then, I would get back to normal, because I was a pretty healthy person. So I thought, and, I just, the kind of that strange confluence of things just happened, where I never really got better. I continued to have headaches, which I'd never had in my life before that. I was having, heart rate spikes, breathing difficulties. The energy levels were through the floor. I was having to stop often, like halfway up our stairs, and we did not have a massive house. It was, we had one flight of stairs, and I'd have to stop partway through. But even sitting on like work calls, suddenly I would just have to take a minute, because my heart rate would just, be so elevated. And also looking back, I had really odd things like my pupils were dilated, and, things that didn't at the time make total sense to me, but with the benefit of hindsight and more education, kind of slotted in to really be pointing to issues with my nervous system and being kind of stuck in fight or flight mode. But I think what was great was just being able to, sort of maybe not put the pieces together right away, but that I was able to kind of clock those symptoms and then, sort of use that, when I was sort of finally ready to really grasp the nettle and start to think about recovery. And I think, I have to say that it took me probably a year and a half of doing all of the wrong things. I think I was trying to push through because that's how I'd always gotten through everything. And, if I just give it a little bit more time, my body will just self-correct. These are all the kind of familiar, I think.
People listening will not be able to see, but I am nodding and internally laughing because that's exactly what I did. If it's not working, you just need to try harder.
Yeah, that's great, because that's gotten you through everything else so far. So, just go back to that tried and tested. And I think it just got to the point eventually where we decided to, move back to the US and, changed country and got another relatively high pressure job. And, I just wasn't getting better. It was, I was feeling even worse. And I actually ended up getting COVID for a second time, and, felt horrendous and kind of lost any of the moderate gains that I had. And that's when, I'd been impacted a bit by brain fog, but it really hit a new level with that second infection. And I went from, being able to be a little bit slow and, certainly not feeling like myself, but, I couldn't even really string a sentence together, and in the roles that I was in, it felt completely unsustainable. I was giving a board presentation and having to write out every word that I was going to say. And it just, to remember and be able to actually, share the information and, and it still didn't really work. So, I ended up taking some time out and saying, I really need to prioritize my health. And I need to figure out a way to get better because, COVID isn't going away. It's going to continue to cycle around, unfortunately, but that's where we are. And I needed to work out a way to feel better. I also at that point had a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, and so, when you're dealing with brain fog issues and you have, a curious, very engaged little human being who's interrupting you every 10 seconds, it's a wonderful thing, but it doesn't help you and help your brain function because you can't concentrate on anything at the best of times. And, I was really conscious that, this wasn't the life that I wanted, and it certainly wasn't the life that she needed. And, I wasn't able to be the parent that I'd always figured that I would be, and that, she really needed to thrive. So I think all of those things were like a perfect storm. And I started, I stopped working and I started just diving into research properly. And I felt so fortunate to be able to have, enough capacity to do that for starters, but also, some of the background that I had with working with the NHS and some research skills to, be able to, read papers and kind of understand them and know where to go. And, looking at that, and tapping into the community of lived experience, and including, through this podcast, which was a wonderful resource. And so thank you for that. And to all your guests for sharing some of their struggles in those early days. I was able to kind of, start to pull together, a hypothesis that I could sort of test out, which was, I'm going to pretend that this is, really my nervous system is sort of the main place that I want to start to focus on. And that was that, and started to, do some act proactively, some of the work to to balance and regulate the nervous system. And it worked far beyond what I could have imagined was possible. And that was really the start. And I started to feel better. I know I wrote on a Post-it note, which I keep on my desk. At that time, I just want to have 1 hour that is symptom free. I just want to have like my head clear just for 1 hour to feel what that is again. And also I want to be able to go for a run. Just, one more time kind of thing. But actually what I found was pretty quickly, I was able to do a lot more, and my ability and my capacity increased, my energy levels improved, my head started to clear. I feel like I got my sense of humor back, which I just didn't have the capacity to even contemplate. And then I was well enough to go to an exercise class that everyone had recommended very highly, which was on Monday mornings, outdoor all year long in a very cold climate, but very refreshing. And this happens to be a class that Andrea was running. And, it was definitely a lot of fitness work, but sprinkled in was a tremendous amount of things around increasing and improving connections between the body and the brain, improving nervous system functioning, and this was amazing. And I think really elevated my ability and my recovery. And I think at that point, a little while after that, Andrea and I sort of, were having coffee and had a conversation and said, I think that there's a lot of people who could really use these tools, not just for performance. And she obviously comes from that like elite performance background, but there's ways to leverage a lot of this into, because a lot of them are so simple, they don't take much energy to do, kind of perfect for people who are impacted by long-term conditions. And so then we got together and started, putting together what a recovery pathway would really look like.
Now, I'm really excited to bring Andrea in on the conversation here. But before we do that, you mentioned that you had done some nervous system work that allowed you to get to this point where you were able to go to join this exercise class. Are you able to just say a little bit about what some of those things you did before we move on to the next phase?
Absolutely. So I think that it was initially a combination of things like, working on the vagus nerve in particular. And, just because that was kind of like the hook, that was sort of what I had. And, eye exercises and eye movements, a little, some breathing definitely in there. And I also was very fortunate. I had a friend who did kind of nervous system focused massage. And, I had a couple of sessions there to kickstart things, which was really helpful. But what was really great was, I think, just starting to tap into pacing in a really deliberate way, starting to really hone in on my own symptoms and starting to kind of view them not as the enemy, but as really, really useful signals from the body that, that allowed me to, do as much exercise as I could. But the second I started to feel symptoms creeping in, then I would just take that as a sign to back off. So I think that allowed me to not be frightened to do activity, but also to avoid crashes and post-exertional malaise, which was amazing and meant that, my system wasn't constantly being overstretched and kind of gave me some room to heal, which was great. But I think that a lot of the nervous system activity and the bundle of kind of tools that I had at the start was relatively limited, but was still really effective, as I said, in terms of those, utilizing those eye exercises and a little bit of kind of stretching work. But I was astounded, going to the exercise class and suddenly, working with Andrea, who had this, big bucket of other tools, how much impact those things had. And, and had in real time. It was like you could do the self-assessments and you could feel the benefit. You could see the increased mobility and just kind of how it just released and loosened your whole system kind of instantly. It was pretty remarkable. And then was able to start to utilize those tools, throughout the day, kind of doing them regularly in the mornings and then in the evenings. But, even like standing at the kitchen counter and having a chat, you could just feel yourself tightening up, or you could feel symptoms coming on. And then, just do a few kind of ankle tilts or mobility drills. No one even knows you're doing it, and they make so much impact. And suddenly you've got a little reset, and your energy levels are back up, your symptoms are down, and away you go.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, and it's like when you're in that kind of sort of initial stages of recovery, or where you're starting to kind of pull together a few things, you actually don't want to be overwhelmed by too many. It's actually finding what are the few that have the biggest bang for your buck. What are your biggest wins? And then being consistent with them and starting to learn your own body, isn't it? And learn your own needs. What does my body need in this moment? Does it need stillness, or does it need movement? Does it need a breath exercise, or does it need me to journal out some emotions? What is it in that moment? And then it's as you start to then see a little bit of improvement and gain a little bit of capacity, that's where things change. And maybe you want access, or you get access to different techniques and strategies. And I'm really excited to hear now about the big bucket that you just described of sort of nervous system tools that you bring to this, Andrea. So please tell us about the class and your role here and all of these big bucket of tools.
So Katie came in the class, and I didn't know about that she had long COVID, and she just came, and it was fun. It was great having someone else joining class, and I sprinkled in between, because it's an hour class, so it's like I cannot like do an hour real training with everyone because there are different levels in class. So I sprinkled in those tools when you use your body basically, but getting some cognitive tasks at the same time. And then it's like silly exercises, silly movements, but they become a totally different like skill set, or like I like ask if you like you just like put one cognitive like task on top of it, for example. And it's fun, everyone is laughing, which is like part of the whole thing. And then also creating this new connection in the brain by using your body, really, because like those people come to an exercise class, so I need to use my body, and that's what I did, by still having an effect on the brain. And this can be in different ways, like this, like cognitive skills, tasks, but also just simple, very like concentrated joint movements. And then also having self-assessment, so the people in the class see what it actually does when you just tilt your ankle, as an example. And then it's a totally different buy-in. And also we can adjust to what is needed depending on what the self-assessment tell you, because that's then adjustable to your needs. It's like someone has to go faster, someone has to go slower, someone has to do a few more, someone has to do a few less. And having this this combination and putting it in class was once giving a little break between other exercises, and then also getting the body ready for actually doing like more exercises throughout a whole hour. And then at some point Katie came to me and told me her story and that I helped her without knowing I helped her. And she was sitting, I remember she came to my house and asked, would you be interested in this? This would help so many people. We can like create this program and this, like so many people need that. I said, being interested is the wrong question, because it was like, it sounded so interesting to me, but I had to like shift a little bit other things to make space for it. But it's really exciting to have something prepared and quasi outlined for, which has really an impact.
Yeah, and I think it's been great, you know, and so much of it too is just having a little bit of a mental shift. I mean, you talk about like what were the kind of the things that really helped kickstart that recovery process, and I think, you know, what you talked about a little bit in terms of just that, like acceptance and just really saying, this is where I'm at, you know, my body is where it is, and I need to stop comparing myself to what I used to do, or to have that as a goal or an expectation that I'm going to get there tomorrow, but really focusing in on controlling what you're able to control and not worrying about the rest of it, you know, which is such a tricky thing, but also it's a super simple thing to do. It's like very freeing when you let go of all of the stuff that you can't do something about, and then prioritize and focus on the things that you can. You know, and I think that what was great with working with Andrea is that, you know, from that kind of professional athlete perspective, I think that is like ruthlessly, you know, what that mentality often entails is, you know, just filtering out all the noise, focusing on the goal, you know, controlling what you're able to control, you know, and not worrying and just not letting everything else go.
And when the athlete component comes in into the whole picture, it's also many people think like train harder, what kind of heart rate, how fast you run this loop, and it's not about it. It's also about that, but it's also like what can we do that we can train on the highest level, and then pacing is a whole thing which the athletes do all of the time. We don't go to the cinema when it's competition season, for example, because it's like it would be not ideal to get anything. Or like
pick up illnesses.
Yeah. Or like really focus on, no, I cannot go to this party, or if I go and go home early, like pacing was like embedded in my system. And then also using, of course, diet and nutrition to like feed the body so it's nourished and can do what you ask it to do, but also have this recovery, good sleep, and all these tools which allow you to basically go to training, because then you can do the better training, and when you can do the better training, you can perform better in the competition. So it's a lot about like what else around this training you can do for you, and that's a lot what we also focus when we work with people with long COVID. It's like there's a life, and life needs to happen, and that's the whole point, that life can happen, but what can we do around it so life can be happening on a higher level, or on the level which is like desired.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I said this to you guys before we started recording, didn't I? About when I spoke to David Petrino, and he was talking about the similarities between working with people with long COVID and MECFS, and, you know, the sort of elite athletes that he was working with. And, you know, and he was talking about, again, that kind of 1%, 0.5%, you know, the tiny, tiny margins, you know, and with the long COVID MECFS people, it's those tiny, tiny gains. You know, okay, we can't even do 1%, let's do 0.5%. It's still going to start to add up slowly, but it's going to add up and it's going to make a difference. And it's just, as you were just describing, you know, that elite athlete, which on some level is like, it's so far the other end of the scale that it's like you can't even comprehend it when you're unwell. But it's those same tiny gains, just at the other end of the spectrum, trying to do the most with what you have and get the most out of your body in the most efficient way, whilst not overloading yourself, overtraining, you know, pushing yourself too hard. And also, exactly like you were just saying, you know, training isn't just the physicality, it isn't just running, it's not just, you know, doing your sport, it's all the other things around it. it's your breath practice, it's your recovery process, it's your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep. And all of these things are just as important, if not more important, maybe in the long COVID ME/CFS space. So it's, despite being so far apart, your elite athletes and your long COVID ME/CFS, it's amazing how those kind of commonalities do come together, so long as we're approaching it, I think, as you say, in that kind of very careful way. And the goals are very different, aren't they? We're not wanting a PB, we just want to be able to get out of bed.
But like a tiny margin, back to the tiny margin, can be in sports when you see like maybe at the Olympics a third or fourth place, and it's like a medal or no medal, and then that's a huge difference. But it's maybe just point of 1 second, and then you can also see this difference. The same, can I get 1 minute out of bed or maybe 2? This difference, and like also like seeing those little differences with this huge impact is very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that what's really neat, and I think you touched on this, is that I think I probably didn't have an appreciation for how much of the kind of top athlete training regime and just general kind of living regime, didn't involve physically pushing yourself. But I think so much of that translates, and I think that around the pacing, there's so many great lessons there, including looking at the level of toxins in your home and environment and the drain that has on your system without really thinking about it, and the capacity that you can create for being able to go out for a walk or do something else that you really love, just by thinking about the soaps that you're using at home or the detergents that you have that, might be, unwittingly taxing your body through the day. And also what's really neat is, as Andrea said, a lot of the tools that support the nervous system health and brain-body connections and rebuild some of those connections that may have been impacted or lost by either the virus or by, kind of the implications of not being able to move as much afterwards, are very gentle. And so there are things that, you can intersperse in a training regime, that to kind of, fill those gaps without taxing your body, but you can just lift and shift them over so that they're very simple things for people with very limited physical ability to do and do safely, as you say. But I love, I think a lot of these things, like have been done, especially some of the little cognitive drills, as athletes and, footballers and everybody trains to get faster. But I think a lot of these tools also help people be more coordinated and more mentally sharp. And I know, like Liverpool, as an example, under Jurgen Klopp, like he brought in a lot of these same types of tools, and you saw the success with like the youth team players coming through. Like there's something really magical and special happening there with a very deep bench and capability at the club. And it's not an accident, and there's an ability to know what those are and harness these things, and I think that we've been really lucky to be able to do that and to help people out using some of them.
And also from the athlete perspective, you need to train on the training is very straining. So those recovery tools cannot be that you cannot strain your body even more, because then it doesn't work. So it has to be something gentle to being able to train at the level you need to train it.
Yeah, that recovery. And I guess, putting this back into the sort of the long COVID ME/CFS space, we might do some activity. Maybe you've built up capacity and, you decide to walk out to your garden or something, which, to a former person, it's nothing. But to person recovering from long COVID or ME/CFS, it's unthinkable. And then when you do start to think about it, and I think, this is where, as you say, all of these tools start to come in. How do we prep for that activity? How do we lay the groundwork? And again, you hear about breath work being used in sports much more, and tools like visualization. and like the sports world have been using these things for ages. And it's such a powerful tool. So it's like, okay, how do we prep before our activity? And also, how do we recover afterwards? We walk out to our garden. Okay, what do we do after that? And the before and after are just as important as the during, if maybe more important than the during. And it's like however you look at these things, whether it's training or whether it's long COVID recovery, again, it's these kind of parallels. We're doing a similar thing in a different way with a different approach with different goals. But there are things from both worlds, I think, you know, that do start to come together, which is really very cool. Because on the surface of it, you look at the elite athletes and you look at long COVID and MECFS and you think they couldn't be more different. um, so that's amazing. Now, moving on a little bit, you had built capacity up by using some of these tools. You joined the class, which had enabled you to get some more. You'd met Andrea, who changed your world. And started to build more. What did that kind of full recovery look like? How did you kind of know that you were fully recovered? We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Great question. And I feel like it's kind of the question that's always out there, because so many people think about recovery as being back to where they were the day before they got their COVID infection. And for me, I space, but I'm much healthier for it. So I feel like, I feel so much more capable, knowledgeable, and physically able, mentally able than I was at that time, which is a really interesting thing. And, I think in terms of recovery, certainly I had some goals and milestones that made me feel like I was recovered, in terms of, being able to, as I say, go out and run for a half an hour again, and, go out for a hike and not worry about it. And, some of the kind of endurance things, certainly some of the elements around, mental capacity and just, feeling like I could, do what I wanted to do. Reading and spending time on the computer wasn't a strain anymore. So there was sort of that kind of initial layer of recovery that felt like, okay, I'm functional again in a way that is helpful for myself and my family, and, I can build on this. But what's been remarkable is kind of seeing like the continued improvement, even when I felt like, oh, I'm back, I'm feeling good. And, as I said, one of the things that I found that really made me feel like not like myself was, the inability to kind of plan. And, I was always the family coordinator, and, my husband is amazing. He's like a wonder doing administrative stuff, but I was always the person that would have like the plan and the big picture. And it was like, okay, we're going to do this week and this next week. And, when I wasn't able to do that because I didn't have the capacity, we all suffered because of that. And I think being able to kind of do that and play that role and, kind of, feel like myself again, like my brain was working, was a huge aspect in my recovery. And I think I mentioned it earlier on, but I felt like also, I had enough capacity that like, my sense of humor came back, which is such a small thing. And it was something I didn't notice that much while I was ill because, you're just so underwater, you're trying to just hang on.
Life isn't funny when you're sick, is it?
No. It's like, and that, again, that has an impact on, how you interact with other people and how you're processing the world. And so that was actually, not something that was on my tick list, but was a huge thing that when it returned just felt like, wow, this is, I'm back and this is really great. But I think what's been remarkable, and I think again kind of taps into that there's a tool set and a skills set out there that people are using to continually improve their performance, is that I feel like I'm not sure where my ceiling is. So I feel really recovered, but I keep kind of enhancing my baseline at the same time. So, I'm excited actually to see where it all lands. But I think my diet has been transformed. I think, kind of 70-80% of your immune system is kind of, in your gut lining, and that all links up to your nervous system. And, I think the knowledge around that was really powerful. And some of the, again, the lessons from Andrea and her world around how to support gut health, not just, eating healthy. And I'm just kind of saying that in air quotes, but I think really focusing on, an anti-inflammatory diet was a really big thing. And, thinking about recovery, I can eat what I want, but I also need to pay attention still. So, there are some things that I notice that are different in my body. And, I don't know if those will ever change. And I don't know if some of that is just because I'm now really used to, my body is adjusted to getting the right thing. And then it's very grumpy with me when I don't put the right thing in it anymore, which is probably not a bad thing. But it's been fun to be able to pass some of that on to my daughter as well, who, enjoys certainly, all of the stuff that she gets at a typical kid's birthday party, but also really likes the kind of the healthier versions of cookies and muffins and stuff that, that don't have processed sugars and, gluten-free and all of those kind of things, has also been a really big component that I now wouldn't get rid of. So, I think the recovery word is such an interesting one, but one of the things that I found as part of the journey, which I think is a really hopeful message, is that the benefits, once they started to accumulate, really stacked up. And like once my systems in my body, my nervous system, my metabolic system, my immune system, all started to kind of shift through these tools and go in the right direction, it was almost like they were just begging to be put on a self-correction path. And the benefits really stacked up quickly and, accumulated very, very rapidly once I gave them the right input and the right nudges. And I feel like that was, unexpected, but so exciting and welcome. And it, again, I think, as you were saying, that teaches you a lot about your body's capacity to heal if you're giving it the right inputs.
And it comes back to that greater awareness, but also knowing better and doing better, doesn't it? And, I think as we get older as well, it's also taking as best care of ourselves as we can, because we want to be as healthy as we can for as long as we can. So finally, I normally ask, what advice would you give yourself now with the benefit of hindsight? And I think you guys will both have some insight on this. Obviously, Katie, what do you think you would have wanted to know? But Andrea, maybe what did you tell her and she didn't listen? Or what do you think that she needed to know?
So maybe first, there's also again a correlation. When I was competing, of course, this was not always good. Like to be on this team in the German biathlon team back in this time, you had to be on the podium. In other way, you get kicked off the team. And I had like 2 bad years in it. And I, like, at this point, I said to myself, okay, I need to like do the things I know which will be helpful for me, to not need to blame myself when I'm 60 years old and look back to it. So it's like, maybe I don't know everything, and meanwhile I know I didn't know back days everything I could have known, but I did the things I knew are helpful, and I didn't do the things I knew are not helpful. And this got me back on the team, and I had my best 10 years of my career. And like looking back, I always know more now, because like I'm not stopping learning, because knowledge is like such a good value, and like that's why we also like include like understanding your body. We don't just share the tools, we also share the tools, why they work and what helps and what's the background behind it. And I think this is something we can look at, like not blaming ourselves, not knowing everything yet, but like doing the things we know already we can do, and be like deliberate with it, and don't judge by something is very small, like an ankle movement or like a breath work, but like using those tools before we actually judge if this is working or not. And I think this is a very important message. And also keep being like, want to understand your body and what's going on to be able to like utilize the tools which are working best for you. And so that's basically my message. And Katie's a very good listener.
Yeah. I would echo all of that completely. And I'd add to it a couple of things. And one mentioned already, but can't say it enough, is just, kind of accepting where you are and really making friends with your symptoms, which sounds like such a weird thing to do, but actually kind of changing your perspective that they're helpful messages from your body rather than things to make your life truly miserable was a real game changer for me, and allowed me to then, pace more effectively, not push myself and experience crashes, and kind of keep my body in the zone where it wasn't in fight or flight, but could be in rest and repair more often to actually accelerate that recovery process. So I feel like that was a really big factor. And again, I think Andrea's point about small things being really impactful is, can't be said enough times. And the right, evidence-based movements, as you say, breath work, which you got lots of experience with, changes, to, toxins in your environment, little things that you can do that are, easy swaps or that are easy to incorporate in, can really stack up and make a big difference and set you on a totally different trajectory and give you more capacity to then be able to do bigger stuff and, more changes that are going to accelerate your recovery. And also I think that, that the thing that was amazing to me was how quickly things turned around once I started doing those things. But the challenge, I think, is creating a little bit of knowing the right things to do and then creating the space to do it. But I think so many people we talk to, get in that loop of feeling I'm like they're too unwell to start, and therefore they stay unwell. And I think that the biggest thing, and I was definitely there myself, but I think that the benefits and the wins are so great that almost you can't afford not to start. And so I would say, just pick something, one or two things that are really achievable. Don't worry that it's not perfect. And I think that it's really hard as well that, one of the symptoms of long COVID is anxiety. And so that sense of, and I'm not someone who's ever suffered from anxiety, but I felt it very deeply. I doubted my ability to make choices, all of those things, when I was unwell. And again, that's part of the symptom set. So just acknowledging that that's not something that needs to inhibit you necessarily. Your body is not sure what's going on and it's trying to protect you. But if these things are good, then you can, feel free to go for them and do it in a gentle way.
It's finding the right thing at the right time in the right amount, isn't it? And to start with, it's probably very, very gentle, very, very tiny things in very, very tiny amounts, whether it's a breathing practice or some form of very gentle movement or whatever that is for you. There's a million things out there that help people. So it's piecing together your puzzle in the right way. Guys, thank you so much for coming along today. It has been awesome hearing your story. It's been really interesting hearing about how these two worlds intersect and how that actually is totally relevant on many levels. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us. If people want more information and even maybe to try some of the movements out, we've got more info. We've got a YouTube channel, but also with some examples that people can follow. And it's Thrive 90 because, you know, the data from the NHS was not good if you have this suite of symptoms in terms of longevity and life expectancy. And I didn't want to be in that place and wanted to find a way out of it and to as you say, to age well. And Andrea wanted to be skiing when she was 90. And I said, that sounds just fine to me. So that's kind of where that comes from and that idea comes from.
And I'll get all those links into the show notes so everyone can connect with you there if they would like to. Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear